As parents, when we discover our kids might be using substances, our first reactions might not be what we hope they would be. Fear speaks louder than reason, and we make rules, express our disappointment, and shame our kids for the choices they've made. This can build a wedge between our kids and the connection we wanted to create before fear spoke up. We know that this is hard. And our guest today will share with us some strategies that can help us be a little gentler with ourselves and focus on creating connection with our kids. My name's Victoria Keddis. I'm a mom, a facilitator, and a director of health literacy here at FamilySmart. We hope this conversation today will give you a starting place when faced with the uncomfortable that comes with our kids exploring and being curious about substance use. I am joined by the caring Douglas Hardie, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Victoria. I'm excited to have this conversation about the tricky topic of substance use in families. A little nervous too, because these kinds of talks always make me a little nervous, but I'm going to do my best to make some kind of sense for you and your viewers. Listen, I just wanted to start by appreciating FamilySmart as an organization that I just think has been so important as a voice for families, not just helping us kind of shape policy and practice across the province around these issues, but just for all the ways in which you support parents and caregivers who are struggling with these issues. And, I was just thinking that one of the things that happens around substance use is that it's a kind of isolating effect for parents. There's so much shame and anxiety and blame, and parents are so hard on themselves when these problems emerge, that it can really cause parents to isolate, which actually contributes to the problem because parents need support. But very quickly, just to introduce myself, I am a registered clinical counsellor. I've been involved in counselling and family therapy for a long time, but in the last 10 years, I've had this wonderful job with the health authority here on Vancouver Island, supporting youth and family substance use teams, counselling programs and outreach programs for youth who are struggling with substance use across the spectrum of use, meaning mild symptoms all the way to much more high-risk acute kinds of situations. And one of the things I've been most interested in is how can we bring parents on board when we're trying to work with these kids. I should mention that I'm also a father of two young men, 24 and 21. And so I love those boys dearly, and I'll tell you, raising them has just taught me more about this work than anything else. And so I have a great appreciation for all the things that we're going to talk about and all the challenges that parents are up against and trying to be the best parents they can be. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And as I think about parents and how I mentioned earlier, fear comes up first with this topic, and how that can really affect our approach. I was grateful for the moments where I was able to pause as a parent and really think about how I wanted to react so that I would get more out of my child than have them shut down. And it wasn't easy. I was screaming on the inside, but would love to speak about that fear and the impact it can have on our kids and our relationship with them. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, you've done a lovely job of describing the process, actually. I think it's so important to acknowledge the fear and the worry that this topic generates in parents, and to just really normalize that. Like, it's absolutely normal and understandable that parents worry about this. particularly in the context of this awful opioid crisis that we're all sort of aware of. I think that's really elevated the fear that parents have. And so that's normal. The great question is, how are we going to manage that fear and worry, and in what ways is it going to affect, the ways that we actually function as parents in those difficult moments with our kids. We'll come on to some examples of that in a bit. But yeah, I think it's just a really useful question for parents to think about. Like, when I'm anxious and worried and trying to deal with something with my child, how does that fear and anxiety affect my functioning as a parent in that moment? And can we kind of step back and observe that, think about that? Just a little example from my own humble efforts as a parent. If I'm dealing with one of my sons and I'm worried about something that's going on for him, if the fear and anxiety has kind of caught me and is running the show, then probably I'm going to be talking too much, telling him what the problem is, what he needs to do about it, and basically hogging the conversation. And likely he's going to be either tuning me out, distancing, or arguing with me, both of which have the potential to make me more anxious and fearful, because now I'm worried about the way this thing's going, and he doesn't seem to be hearing all the great advice I have for him. And this kind of spiral, escalating spiral, can happen. Conversely, on a good day, if I'm in a more calm down, thoughtful, self-regulated version of me, I'm going to be more able to do some of the things I'm going to talk about today, like asking some good questions about what's upsetting him, trying to hold space for that, to validate the things that he's up against in whatever the dilemma is. Above all, restraining that impulse in me to jump on top of him and fix the problem for him. All those kinds of things. And, gosh, I wish I could pull that off more often than I do. But that's kind of the roadmap that I've laid out for myself, and it picks up on some of the things we're gonna talk about today.
Glad to hear I'm not the only parent that's really good at fixing their problems for them. Although I really wasn't good at it. I just like to think I was.
Yeah.
So with that, parents and caregivers, we want to do what's best for our kids, and it's important to us. And if we could prepare for something, even better. So maybe we can take a practical example and walk through it, of what you would suggest as far as how we can walk through. Let's maybe start with your youth comes home late from a party and they smell very strongly of marijuana. Now what?
Now what? The $1,000,000 question.
What's next?
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm not going to dive too deep into the weeds of, all the things that one could do. What I'm going to try and do is sort of draw a little bit of a roadmap and maybe identify some useful kind of guiding principles that parents might think about in terms of how to respond to this kind of a scenario. I mean, part of what's so hard about this as parents is, in the cut and thrust of family life, there's so much stress and strain going on. These things are coming at you from all of these things are very, very challenging in the moment to manage. So just my kind of caveat to all of this is, no one gets this right. We all fall flat in our faces. We all get caught in the reactive processes. But, part of how we try to support parents in the work here is, to invite them to slow this thing down and think about how they want to show up around these kinds of scenarios. So to take your scenario, Yes, it's such a classic one. One of the things I think a parent might or caregiver might think about in this situation would be around timing. You know, how upset am I as a parent right now? How able am I going to be to do the things that I want to do in handling this? How able is my child going to be to participate in a productive conversation? Um, and again, that speaks to a parent's ability to control their own reactivity, be thoughtful about the situation and the options available, and make some good decisions, which is incredibly hard to do when that kind of scenario occurs. But that might be something that a parent starts to work on. It's like, okay, we're not going to talk about it right now. You're going to go to bed. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. And so just let's imagine that piece happens and the child heads off to bed. So then what about that talk tomorrow? Now, one of the things we spend a lot of time with parents on is just like really helping parents to think through, what is my position on my child's experimentation with substance use? What are my values and principles around substance use? Like, what are the limits and boundaries that we're going to set in our family? I'm not here to tell parents what they should be. I think there's a great variation across families about how they want to handle this. What I would suggest is that what's important for the child is that there's a kind of clarity and consistency, that the parent's able to articulate in a calm, clear way, here's our position on this, here's the expectation. And, we've thought about some consequences that are proportionate to the transgression, and here are the things you can expect if as predicted, the child is going to push against some of that. So ideally, parents are kind of thinking in advance of some of these predictable challenges and how are we going to handle it? And, a good coach, counselor, or a good neutral friend can really help you out with that. So then it's going into the meeting to talk with the child about the issue. Again, what are the key principles you might be thinking about as a parent? Well, to reflect on the little example I gave, can I resist the urge to jump straight to the kind of behavior correction and all the consequences, and maybe hold a little space for conversation about what happened, to really invite the young person to talk about what was going on for them, what was going on at the party, what were some of the pressures that the young person might have been up against around their own choices and decision making. If you can hold space for that and really validate what the young person has been up against, or the young person's experience around substance use, that I think can really be helpful in terms of opening up the conversation. So the youth isn't quite so defensive. They feel heard. This is what youth are so sensitive to in the teen years. They're so sensitive to feeling that their parents don't trust them, don't view them as capable of making good decisions, super sensitive around that, defensive. And so by approaching things that way, the parent sort of conveys to the kid, hey, like we have a position on this issue and we're going to set that limit with you, but we also recognize that you're out there, you're dealing with your peer group, you've got to figure out how you're going to make decisions about these and other important issues. And we want to be here as a resource to you so that you can actually talk to us about all those challenges, because that's hard. And that's the goal, And then, there's a place to get real clear about here's where we stand, here's the limit, here's the consequence. And again, these things are ideally sort of thought through and reasonable. I mean, most parents, if you're anything like me, have in the heat of the moment come up with sort of outrageous consequences that, there's no way I'm going to follow through on or are going to hold up. Again, because I'm not thinking clearly, I'm activated, I'm reactive. So I really want to think about that stuff through. I want to talk to my partner if I have a partner. Hopefully we can be really on the same page with that. All those things, none of which are easy to do. This sounds so straightforward. It's incredibly hard to do when we're worried about our child's safety. There's such an instinctive urge to protect and control the things that put our kids at risk. So this really takes hard work. It takes time. You got to be ready for the kid to push back, to be upset. This is one of the things parents have the toughest time with, is tolerating our own distress when our kids are distressed. And knowing that it's okay for them to be distressed and upset with us and mad about losing the phone for the day or whatever it is. And we're going to try to stay the course on these thought through strategies. And, really the trick is to recognize you're not going to pull that off as neatly as I've just described. You're going to get pulled all over the place, but the goal is to sort of observe it and to be really paying attention to how this whole process is playing out, and see if you can do a little bit of a better job with yourself in that process. And having a good counselor to go and review that effort with really helps. So those are some of the things I would think about in terms of ways to respond rather than react best you can.
I appreciate as you say all of this, that it's not easy and it's going to take time and it's going to be a process. I know that when there's kids that aren't responsive in the good times, these hard conversations are going to be that much harder. So I love that we're looking at what we have control over. We're not trying to control our kids. We're trying to make sure we come in and control how we react in the situation, because that's really all we do have control over in that situation. And I love that there's planning ahead, that there's thinking ahead, that we're taking time to reflect on this beforehand, not just automatically when this happens. So that is such a strength place to come from, and to be able to pause. We know how hard it can be, but the gift of that to us and to our relationship with our child is exponentially more important. I imagine in your work and the people you support doing this is that there's some common patterns that you see with families. And knowing that this is hard work, what does it take for parents to shift out of those problematic patterns, the ones that are fear-based, the ones that are control-based, to being a resource to their kids?
Yeah, that is another great question. I think it starts with observing the patterns. Like, part of what happens once you start paying attention to these processes that play out is you realize how much of this is sort of automatic, this reactivity that gets going in the relationship. The kid does something, parent A reacts, parent B reacts, sibling reacts. There's a kind of sequence of very quick, automatic steps that often leads to this kind of escalating intensity with really poor outcomes, where everyone's upset, feeling slightly out of control, and a kind of a bigger problem to handle. And what seems to be really helpful, certainly it's been helpful for me, is developing this observational capacity. And sometimes counselors will help parents actually, take an incident like the kid who came home high, and the the ensuing escalation, and just really map out step by step who, what, where, when, how this thing got escalated with whatever that outcome was. And that process in of itself can be very helpful because it shifts something that feels sort of out of control more towards something that actually there's a predictable sequence of events. Everyone in the process is playing a part in that process. And as the family starts to see that more clearly, the parents can begin to think about ways of interrupting or intervening in that sequence of events. So you can start to see the part that self is playing and begin to think alongside a good counselor, for example, okay, what could I work on in that? What's one thing that I could do to maybe kind of tone this thing down rather than be part of this escalating intensity? So that might be a dad who typically distances and avoids and lets partner take over, actually move towards the problem and get a little more involved. Or it might be a mother who typically gets involved and takes action first to hold back a little bit and hold a little more space. So all the different variations. But the idea is that you can start to see that there are these actually quite predictable patterns that go on over and over again in a family. And there are ways to intervene. And if just one person can kind of pull up in that process and do something different, it really does affect the whole system. Doesn't necessarily solve the problem in the short term, but that whole system in time, if that one person can maintain that effort, will actually pull up its functioning.
And appreciate that as we look at all of this and pausing as parents to look at our role in things isn't really comfortable, but the benefit of it far outweighs the not stopping and looking, because it sounds like what you're saying is that one shift in that pattern can change the course for everyone involved. And what a gift that is to our families if we're able to do that. And for ourselves, I know that when I do it in parenting ways that are reactive, I don't go to bed feeling very good about myself. But when I'm able to pause and kind of reflect on things before and have that planned response rather than reaction, I just feel so much better. But I also want to acknowledge that repair is a really important part. So if we don't do it the way we wish we would, I mean, repairs is this glue that brings families together in beautiful ways as well. Yeah. That we can say sorry, that we can say, you know, I didn't show up the way I wish I would have. And our kids can see the humanness in that and have something to attach to that they can actually honor in our interactions. So
yeah, that's really well said. I think that's absolutely right. Yes, back to this being more gentle with ourselves, not being so hard on ourselves when we are pulled into this reactivity. It's normal. No family gets away without being caught up in this to some degree. And the great thing is, you know, one of the things parents really worry about, particularly during the parent-teen phase, when these problems get going, is they fear that they're losing their attachment to their child. It seems so distant. The kid is so allergic to them in some ways. And I think it's very easy for a parent to panic. And, you know, the attachment is so strong. You really don't have to worry about that. And the great thing about this work is, however awful the last interaction went, there's another one coming right up, and you can work on that, you know, and you can try and do a little bit of a better job. And I think nurturing yourself in that and appreciating your effort, you know, to show up and be the best you can be is such an important part of this. And yeah, it's hard work. It's ongoing, but I think you described beautifully, the gain, not just for the child who benefits from this more mature version of parent, but how the parent starts to feel a little more, okay, my feet are on the ground. I'm more in this kind of leadership role in the family. I'm a more mature version of myself. All the things that we're striving for. I think when you can be a little less caught in that reactivity, you gain that value, and that's really comforting. So it's
Right.
worth it.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up our time together, Douglas?
I guess I always worry that, this idea of here's the right way to do it. I mean, I just want to make sure everyone understands that, yeah, I think we're all kind of reaching for a clearer roadmap through these challenging relationship dynamics, and it's a work in progress for all of us.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, and thanks to FamilySmart for hosting this conversation and many others.
Thank you. Thank you for your calm voice for us to learn from when we're facing our fears around this. And thank you all for being here with us today, and to the support of our funders who allow us, and partners who allow us to do this great work. I wish you all moments to feeling like you've got this, and the patience with yourself as you learn the best way that works for your family. You all, everyone.